Our next guest, of course, a former Canucks executive, and now has joined us on the dark side periodically. The one and only Chris Gear joins us once again. How are you, Chris?
Well, gentlemen, I'm rested from a trip to Osoyoos, so happy to restart my week with you guys.
The off season continues, albeit slowly, very slowly for the Canucks side of things in the last handful of days. But one item got off the National Hockey League to-do list with Alex DeBrincat's trade and signing. Do you believe that one sort of thing happening triggers a bunch of other things? Because there's still a bunch of other trades and possible acquisitions out there, and we kept on being told that one thing will trigger the rest. Do you believe that actually happens in off seasons?
Yeah, sometimes it really does. Sometimes it's like a domino effect where one player who a number of teams might have been contesting or going after, once that player selects a team, then suddenly those teams that were looking for a player are now on to plan B or plan C, and so it does start the ball rolling. I think in DeBrincat's case, I think he made it pretty clear that there were only a couple of teams that he was willing to go to, so probably not a lot of teams were still in on him. But yeah, that's a lot of money and a big name player off the board, so that probably does start to shake things up a little bit and bring things into perspective for some other teams.
Canucks got a little bit of work done over the weekend with the signing of Nils Hoglander. Obviously, that was a player that you were a part of when they drafted him. What do you make of his progression to this point? And if you don't want to speak to him necessarily specifically, but a young player that starts in the NHL and then gets sent down to the minors, I think some people in this market forget he's only 22 years of age. Like, if it had been in reverse, if he had started in the minors and now played 2 full seasons in the National Hockey League, we would just say, oh, that's the natural progression. But what do you think a year down in Abbotsford can do for a young player? And are you intrigued to see what it will do in terms of lighting a fire under him?
Yeah, I've always really liked Hoglander. I did. When they sent him down to the AHL, I wasn't sure that was the right move, because I thought he was still an NHL caliber player that just needed the right opportunity to make his mark. But he went there with the right attitude, and that's when that happens and a guy goes down and you see him work and you see him progress and gain confidence. Ultimately maybe that was the right move, and I think he's going to come back and make a really big contribution. So I'm excited to see what that does for him. He's a really nice kid. Hard worker, just the speed, the tenacity, the forechecking that he brings. It's something that not a lot of players have, and I think it's missing. And if he can start to score on a more regular basis, that's a pretty potent weapon for the team to have. So, based on him being in the AHL, they could have gone safe with 1 year at league minimum. They do a little bit of a bet on a 2-year deal. Maybe they could have gone even further for not much money, but, kind of a safe bet on both sides. He gets a little bit of a raise over league minimum to take the extra year. And I think they get a very reasonable cap hit that, if it doesn't work out and they have to bury him in the AHL, it's still under the buried amount. So it wouldn't cost them anything on their cap. So all in all, a good signing there, I think.
So they get that deal out of the way. They've basically cleared their plate now. And it's all about when can they start talking to Elias Pettersson and his camp about the big extension. And I know JP Barry was on local media recently and saying no real plans to meet face-to-face until later in the summer. You've been through this with the Pettersson camp and the bridge deal that he got. As we sit here now, knowing what we know about the player, do you think there's any way that his next contract doesn't start with a 10?
Probably not. There's a chance you get it in the high 9s, but 10's probably realistic. And that's not a crazy deal by the league standards today. You've got every team has at least one star, I think, that's in that stratosphere. And so if you're in and around 10, I think that's a decent number. I'm not sure what other players of Petey's ilk are up for renewal right now. I haven't really looked at those comparables, but if they're out there, you can bet that Pat and JP will wait and use every last bit of time they have to assess what the market will bear for Petey. But at the end of the day, I think that number is achievable, and I think they'll get something done, and hopefully Petey will be around for a while.
He's a guy I think that wants to get an education himself, though, on where this team is going. Do you get that feeling that he's going to use his time as much as the team has used time on a number of occasions on a number of players to make sure that they're signing the same player that they believe in. He wants to sign with the same team that he believes in, and do you think that he might use months and months and months here as a further education as to where this team's going?
Yeah, I think in Petey's case, he's got the time, and why not use it? I think it does a couple of things. One is it gives him a chance to evaluate the direction of the team and how these new acquisitions may help it or where it puts them in terms of being a competitive team, during his future. But I think also it gives him an opportunity to see if there are other deals for young RFAs like him that come together that provide him with, additional ammunition against the team in terms of what his number should be. So I think waiting only helps Petey. It obviously doesn't help the team, but, I think Petey and his agents are smart enough to know that waiting is in their favor. The only downside could be an injury. But, typically players, I think, will try to maximize their opportunity, and that comes by waiting and having all the available information. The other quick little point is that, in today's NHL, I think RFAs are exercising their power. We saw it with Matthew Tkachuk. We've seen it with the Brinkat. We've seen it with a few other players where, you'd like to think that Petey is happy here, but if there are some things that, aren't to his liking, or he just wants to test what's out there, he could be a little intransigent and say, no, I'm not going to sign for this money, and put the team in a bit of a bind. And, it's not something you like to see league wide, that RFAs are using their muscle, but it's a reality that now has to be dealt with.
The qualifying offer possibility is kind of being used as a hammer now, right? It's even though you've theoretically got a year of service left to give to that team, a lot of teams don't want to have to use that. So we'll see how that goes. Back to Höglander for just a second before we leave him. Watching him in the bubble that year, or not in the bubble, in the weird season, in the North Division season, did management believe that was him, or was there sort of a feeling that this was a weird enough circumstance that performance had to be taken with a grain of salt?
That's a tough question. Obviously you're playing a limited number of teams. You're not getting that exposure to him playing against a full cross section of the league.
Yeah.
But you like the habits, you like the traits that he was showing. Still NHL teams. Not like they weren't NHL teams. Yeah. So I think we believed that this was a player that had a bright future, and I still think that. A little bit of a setback last year, but I think he's got the characteristics of a player that you need in today's NHL with speed, with, again, tenacity. I think he'll be good in a playoff environment, right? He doesn't shy away from contact and physicality. He's seemed to be durable throughout his career so far. He's flexible. You're even remembering back to the draft and those videos of the stuff he did to prepare himself. He's a specimen, right? So I think he's got a bright future, and I think Canucks getting him on a 2-year deal was a good piece of work.
Chris, I'm curious to get your thoughts on Vegas and the way that they have operated here, and ultimately they have. The long wait is over. They got their Stanley Cup after 6 seasons. But we see in pro sports, and not just hockey, a lot of teams are guilty of sort of falling in love with their own players, maybe overvaluing their players. There is a ruthlessness to the way they operate in Vegas, and I think it's led by their owner, who seems remarkably impatient, but, the ends justify the means, I suppose. What about the way that they have operated here? Maybe not so much the first couple of years, but now that they've been around, I say that, been around 6 whole years. But what about the way they do their business?
Yeah, I've been critical of Vegas. When they went after Pietrangelo and they had to dump players for free to do that, and then they went after Eichel and they had to manipulate the LTIR system to do that, and then same thing with Stone going in LTIR to fit everything. And so I haven't liked that aspect of it, but then again, it's a mechanism available to you under the CBA, and they used every advantage they had to fit these star players in, and as Blake said, not get married to the guys that they had, and just said, you know what, we're gonna move on from some of these guys and bring in other guys that we think can get the job done. So, in hindsight, credit where it's due. I wasn't always a fan of, maybe like dumping a player like Pacioretty and getting nothing back for it. But at the end of the day, they were able to fill his cap space with somebody who, perhaps has added more value to their team. So at the end of the day, they did a really nice job of bringing all those pieces together. And it was high stakes poker at times and really tough cap dealings, but they got it done. And at the end of the day, nobody remembers all the stuff along the way.
What's this time in the summer look like for a management group? And everybody's going to be a little bit different. And I think it's also, you have to be careful about, are they in the office physically? Well, in the hybrid work world, I mean, who knows what that even means anymore about being in the office. But what do you suspect right now here? And we're only July 10th. It kind of feels like July 25th in my internal clock, but it's like, it's only July 10th. Are they still putting in 8 hours, 10 hours a day on files right now, or are they starting to peel off and have a little vacation, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a little more relaxed right now. Whoever's doing their contracts is probably still working through some of the RFAs, not just at the NHL level, but the AHL. And you've got there's still UFAs that you might want to bring in for the AHL team for depth. And I don't think they're done at the NHL level either, because as much as, Soucy, Cole, and Bluger were nice additions, I think when you make a decision to buy out OEL and regain that cap space and push his problems to the future, it means that you're trying to be, more competitive now, or you're trying to get something done now. And so to make that decision on OEL and then just go with, kind of hole fillers in those three players, even though I think they're nice additions, they're not the kind of addition that I think takes them to the next level. And what I worry about in particular is if an injury happens to Petey or Miller, you're asking either Teddy Bluger or Sheldon Dries to do a second line center. And that's, no disrespect to those guys. That's just not in their wheelhouse. So, and the other part of that is JT may actually, or probably is a better winger. So you're already starting with a second line center that perhaps should be your first line winger. And then the depth from there is really tough. So I think, they're probably still looking at another center, one that maybe has more offense that could move up. Some of the guys that were out there, Comfer and Evan Rodriguez, I mean, they cost a bit too much, so I can see why maybe they passed. I wonder whether they go with a guy like Taves. I don't know how much gas he has left in the tank, but, he obviously could play a second line role in emergency basis if he had to. And at this point, I think he would come cheap, and maybe he wants to play in Canada for his final year or two. So, but this time of year, I think the management is having a bit more downtime. They're still making calls. They're still kicking tires on some of the guys that are left. And I think the contracts person is still working pretty hard on getting those minor deals done and some of those RFAs that we don't talk about a lot. Although the Canucks did take care of a lot of those earlier, right, with Juleson and Brisebois and Willan and some of those guys. But I think August is when everything really grinds down to a halt. It's really the only month on the calendar that people take vacation and get some time off and recharge. And then September, you're right back with, young stars and then camp and everything else. So probably a couple more weeks of hard work to try and pin down the last spots on the roster, and then beach time for these guys.
Is there a cap shedding trade though that they need to make it all work?
Well, I think it would be useful. I mean, there's obviously been the smoke around Tyler Myers and perhaps with the Sharks and LeBanc or something. So there could already be something cooked there that the teams agree that they're going to revisit later in the year. Unless there's something they can add for fairly cheap, which I think there's still options to do that in the $1 million range. But beyond that, there's either a hockey trade where it's money in, money out, or it's a cap shedding deal that allows them to maybe sign that more prominent center or more prominent player. I don't think they're going after the Tarasenkos of the world, but there's probably somebody still that brings more offense that they can bring in. So interesting couple of weeks left here, I think.
Well, it's our first visit with you. You mentioned the OEL buyout. I'm just curious, with your institutional knowledge, were you surprised that they went down that road and wrote that check after just 2 years of service from OEL?
Not necessarily. It's definitely a big decision just because of the cap consequences that will flow for the next 8 years. And in some of those years, it's pretty significant. And even though you bank on the cap increasing, it results in, a forced savings in some ways, but an inability to sign players in those years. So it really told me that they value the current cap space and what they're able to do with that now. And they're willing to push that problem down the road a little bit and hope that the increase to the cap will sort of even out that problem. Myself, I heard a lot about OEL having an injury last year that he played through. I think the temptation would have been to try to see if he could come back and maybe if you can squeeze some minutes out of him fully healthy, maybe put him in a bit of a diminished role on a 5-6. I know that's a lot of money to pay for a 5-6, but I don't know that there's a perfect answer to that one. There obviously there's advantages to doing what they did and doing the buyout now and ensuring that if his play does degrade further, they've just rid themselves of the problem now. But there's obviously drawbacks too, where they're going to pay for this for quite a while. So we'll see how it works out. I'm not prepared to, herald it as a great buyout or chastise it as a terrible one. I think it's just one of those things where you make the best decision you can and you hope that it pays off.
Before we let you go, can we blame you for the September 15th Tyler Myers bonus payout? Can we put that at your feet? Were you the one that were thinking, hey, let's put it in September, not in July? Was that you?
That's pretty funny. Those types of decisions on payments and cash flows, they go above my figure.
Above your pay grade? Okay. Wow.
Just leave it at that.
We want to blame somebody, Chris, so I thought we should ask you at the very least.
You know what? Regardless, I think if there's Tyler Myers will get moved at some point. So right. I don't think the angst over that date needs to be as severe as maybe it is. As I said, I think it's possible that San Jose and the Canucks have already, pre-agreed, subject to nothing else happening. I wondered that too. Yeah, they're gonna revisit it, and maybe they already have kind of a deal in principle. You can't confirm it now, but I think there could be something in the works, and I think there's other teams that at 1 million cash, or if there's retention and it's less than $1 million cash, and take the cap hit down from 6. There's teams that are going to be interested in Myers. He's obviously very languished in this market, but I think there's still something there with him. He's a good skater, big body. There's still teams that are going to be interested.
Oh, I mean, if the Canucks could lay down a coupon and have him at $2.5 or $3 million, they'd keep him. They wouldn't do anything with him. But it's just for that cap hit, you just want more, right? That's all. Thanks for doing this, Chris. Appreciate it. The NHL might shut down in August. You can shut it down right now if you want. I know you just got back from a Soyuz, but hopefully you've got more time off ahead. Enjoy your summer, and we'll touch base again soon.
Thanks, Chris.
They're off to Seattle for the home run derby and the All-Star game, so
perfect.
Still gets better.
This is a Harrison Price clip brought to you by
Jason Mortgage.